everyone, and welcome back to Coachy TV. In this video, we're going to talk about strength training that you might want to do that's appropriate for general prep during your cross-country season or your summer part of the season. What we're really going to be trying to focus on is what do runners, specifically endurance runners, really need from a strength training plan. I would say this is probably one of the things that you've got kind of like a wide view on this. You've got some people that would do things like hit weights and do all the things that you would normally do with other sports. And then you've got some people that don't really want to do any of it, for fear of overdeveloping muscles and adding weight and things like that. So I think that there's definitely an in-between that's most appropriate. And the way we're going to find that is by focusing on what the sport-specific strength factors are for the cross-country 5K and how we can add to those strength, or enhance those areas with the strength training plan, and how we can sequence these different types of strength training routines within and around your workout to where you're going to get the most out of them, not just throwing them wherever you can or wherever it just kind of makes sense in terms of timing. How can you really make the most of it and have your strength training accent the other workouts that you're actually doing in your general preparation phase? This is our 2019 boys team after our home invitational meet. We did it in conjunction with the University of South Florida at their golf course right by there. This was kind of halfway through the season, and if you're going to have success at this point in the season, you definitely want to have strong runners so that they don't break down, but you obviously don't want to overdo any particular area. And the interesting thing is sort of the phenotype that we're trying to develop here. Phenotype is something I'm definitely going to mention throughout. If you don't know what that is, specifically, essentially, genotype is your genes, right? Your genetic makeup, and phenotype is how your genetics and your training kind of come together to create a body type. Okay, so when we're doing all this, we really kind of want to keep in mind, with the sport-specific factors, what's kind of the phenotype that we're trying to develop in either yourself or your runners that's going to help complement what they're doing in this case, the cross-country 5K. I am Kyle LaGiacono. I'm the head boys cross-country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 7 years. If you'd like a closer look at some of my credentials, they are there on the screen. Okay, so there are some pros and cons specific to endurance runners that we really want to talk about here when we're dealing with strength training. Okay, we're going to deal with pros and cons, or basically what we want, and I'll go with what we don't want here in a second. But what we want is we want to increase force production from muscles that improve performance in the 5K, i.e., how do we make the race seem easier at race pace? Okay, how do we, there's a lot of foot contacts in this, 3.1 mile, 5 kilometer course, and we want to make it seem as easy as possible by strengthening the key areas for force production so it seems easy at race pace. So that's one thing that we want. Second thing that we want is to improve strength in muscles key to maintaining correct posture and mechanics. So we don't want to just make it easier with those muscles that are actually doing a lot of the work, but we also want to have a strength plan that promotes improved posture and mechanics, especially as these races get long. It can really break down mechanics and posture, typically from weakening of key muscles. So we want to reduce potential injury rate, think what's correct posture and mechanics and how can we enhance that. And the last thing that we want is to increase muscle elasticity within sport-specific moves. Okay, we want to take advantage of free energy with each step. What we do not want, and this is kind of, again, what kind of turns people off from doing any strength training is any of these things happening, which is enhancing muscles that don't contribute to improved performance in the cross-country 5K, okay? If we enhance or make muscles bigger that are just there, that are not going to actually improve performance in the cross-country 5K, that's what we're dealing with here, you're going to have bigger muscles, and what those muscles are going to do if they're not contributing to success, all they're going to be doing is consuming oxygen that we want to go to the working muscle. So these are the ones that we want to enhance without just building up other muscles that are not really going to improve performance in the cross-country 5K. We also do not want to overtrain or overstress muscles to a point posture and mechanics suffer. So a lot of times when people think they're doing things like, say, core workouts, they might be actually promoting bad posture that's going to translate to the actual running. So that's something we don't want to do, okay? Don't train muscles just because they exist. Don't do exercises just because you've seen them done before. So we really want to kind of think, as we said, what is the correct posture and mechanics and how can we enhance them with our training? And Again, kind of talked about this before in terms of oxygen consumption that we want to go to the working muscles. We don't want to add unneeded body weight from muscle mass, okay? We want to figure out how we can increase force production without adding too much extra weight, because they're moving their body through such a long race. You know, pounds matter when you're actually running 5 kilometers. So how can we enhance strength without hypertrophy? Hypertrophy basically means the increase in protein synthesis. That is typically what people think of with strength gains, you know, bigger muscles, more strength. But there's other ways that you can enhance strength. Muscle elasticity is one of them, and central nervous system enhancements is other ways we can do it. So we really don't want, there's going to be some hypertrophy, you know, specifically through, you know, your running and everything, but how can we, you know, minimize hypertrophy but maximize strength in other ways? So really the first point and the second point kind of go together. Oxygen is the bottleneck. We don't want to use oxygen in muscles that are not helping success, and we also don't want to build muscles just to carry them throughout the miles. And then if our posture break down because we haven't trained the key muscles for posture, then we're going to have some problems. So how can we get what we want and not get what we don't want? So what does the ideal phenotype look like? Okay, so we talked about this. We don't want a bunch of muscle mass to be just added. We want to have good mechanics and posture. So the ideal phenotype, what does the person who has the right phenotype or physique, what does that really look like? What is the ideal? Well, we probably want to take a look at who the world record holders are in the 5K, both in the men's and women's, and see what do they actually look like, and see if we can kind of model a phenotype or a training that can get this kind of ideal body in our actual strength training. Women's 5K record holder and men's 5K current record holder. Okay, the women's record holder, her actual track, this is from the world record holders in the track 5K, and I've actually put some other ones on there. If they have a star next to their name, that means it's the world record. Her time in the 5K on the track is 14:11, which is just incredibly fast. Her 5K road race is under 15 minutes still, which is, you know, just absolutely blazing fast. 10K track under 30 minutes, 29:42, and her 3K track time is 8:29. If you want to, what that basically would correspond to in a 2 mile is at about, you know, 35, 40 seconds, so a little bit slower than 9 minutes in a 2 mile. And then the men's record holder, 5K current record is 12:37, and he actually has several records at this point. He's got the indoor 5K record at 12:49, the outdoor track 10K record at 26:17, and his best 3K time on the track is 7:25. So again, that's a little bit over 8 minutes for if you were to run it for 2 miles. So if we look at these people, we're not dealing with people that have a ton of muscle mass. We talked about, obviously, their legs are very strong because of all the contacts and everything, but you don't really have a super big upper body. I mean, if these people were walking, you know, by you in your neighborhood, they would almost kind of look like, you know, your neighbors essentially. They don't have, you know, really big upper body. There's some muscle going on there, obviously, but, you know, not a ton, really. So how can we really enhance, you know, your runner or yourself to make them be a little bit closer to this ideal phenotype? And what are the strength gains that you would need to not, you know, make this be flipped to where you're so big in your upper body and you're carrying extra weight and consuming oxygen? How can we make this to where, you know, you've got those strong leg muscles, but not too much else, and really enhance your 5K performance to be a little bit closer? Obviously not going to be as good as the world record holders here, but to be a little bit closer in terms of our strength to be a little bit more similar to the phenotype that you're seeing here. All right, so first thing I want to get out there is there's a misconception that strength training has to be, you know, moving weights around or throwing med balls or whatever it is that comes to mind. Running in and of itself is strength work, okay? All running is strength work, okay? That's why runners typically have really big thigh muscles and legs in general, because it is strength work, okay? It requires a lot of strength to push off from the earth, okay? You're resisting gravity with each push off. And when you're landing, it's 2 to 3 times body weight, kind of depending on your intensity. The faster you're going, the more intense it's going to be. And in reality, You're actually, if you're doing some of the strength runs we've talked about, short hill intervals, alactic runs, videos in the description down below, it can be as much as 4 to 5 times body weight with each contact. There's no way you could lift 4 to 5 times your body weight if you were to go and actually throw weights on your shoulders and try and lift them. So this requires a ton of strength, just pushing off the ground and resisting gravity. And then to land with this amount of times your body weight with each step, that requires a lot of strength with each actual step. Even low intensity running improves leg muscle strength. So for a long time, people thought that aerobic work, even low intensity, aerobic threshold, easy pace running, it used to be think, oh, well, there's no, strength gains in the way that we used to think about strength gains from that kind of running. Well, in 2014, Kanopka, I think is how you pronounce the principal author's name, released a study, skeletal muscle hypertrophy after aerobic exercise training. Okay, I'll put the link to the study in the description down below. But they found that there was actually an increase in thigh cross-sectional area or muscle mass, or there was hypertrophy after about 6 months of low-intensity aerobic threshold, easy-paced running training. There actually was this improvement. Now, they didn't have like one key finding. The percents vary with group. Age group, level of activity coming into it. So there's a bunch of different groups and the findings based on the groups they split it up in. But basically, every single group had an increase in thigh cross-sectional area with just low-intensity running after 6 months. That really does show you that all running is strength work, no matter what you're doing. Even if it's low intensity pushing off the ground and just the 2 to 3 times your body weight that comes with lower intensity running, you will have that muscle hypertrophy. Now, as we said, we don't want to have a ton of this. We don't want to be carrying a lot of weight, but those are some of the key areas that you need to be strong in order for success in the cross-country 5 section. So we can deal with some hypertrophy in those, and we obviously have to run to get better as a distance runner. So that just, again, kind of points out the fact that all running is strength work. So the real thing that we need to figure out here, now that we know that we do get strength gains just from any type of running, and more so if we're doing those higher intensity type runs like short hill intervals and alactic running, how much work outside of just running, strength work specifically, do we need for cross-country success? Okay, well, there's a couple things that need to be accounted for here in all of this. You want to know the specifics of the runner's training age. Okay, how long have they been running? Now, how old are they, but how long have they been running? Because that's important in terms of adaptation and the strength they've gotten from these other types of strength work of just running. You want to have an idea of their overall strength level, okay? Because if they have a higher level of strength just naturally or from what they've been doing in other sports or in your sport, that's going to affect what you want to do. And just other needs. You might think that this is somebody that's more of a middle distance kid that's doing it. You might want a little bit more force production and things like that. These are the 3 things that you really want to consider as you're doing it. So what I do with my group is I set up a tier system, okay, based on variables that they're going to progress through during their time with you, okay? They'll probably get to tier 3 after about a year. Tier 1 is for beginners, okay? Their first general preparation season, they can do the tier 1 workouts, okay? Everybody can do this. After probably the first general preparation, and they may actually jump into this based on some of these other things that we talked about, but if we're talking about a first-year runner, hasn't really done any sports or anything, just that kid that wants to come out, then they might need the entire general preparation or the entire summer before they can really advance to tier 2. It's somewhat advanced, but they should be able to do it during their first macro cycle for some, okay? So if they just join you for cross-country, then they should be able to do it sometime during that cross-country season. Maybe it'll take them into the track season with you. Some of them are going to be able to do it and jump right in. Like I said, they may have some baselines. And then, once they've kind of mastered that, then you can really go to tier 3. This is what I would say your experienced kids. It may take a full year or more for them to target to this point. If you have boys, they might be a little bit more advanced in this because they might have been doing some weightlifting kind of on their own. Basically, it's how much strength do they have. And I have plenty of kids that advance to tier 3 during their first macro cycle too. But there's sort of checkpoints that I think are important there. But if you want to come up with your own tier system, you might have 5 things they want to progress through. Maybe you have, as you're kind of considering this, maybe you want to kind of chop it down or have different ways of doing it. This is just how I've kind of set it up for my group. So let's take a look at what it looks like in practice in these 3 different tiers. All right, tier 1, and I call this trunk strength work. I hesitate to call this core work because I think there's a big overemphasis on the abdominal muscles. They're important, but I think we really want to kind of think about the entire trunk of the runner, because that's really where the posture comes in, and that goes all the way down to the hips, up to through your abdominals and into your back. Those are really where the posture comes into play, and these are things that really everybody can do. So I may accidentally say core work, trunk work, it's the same thing here, but really kind of getting the idea of thinking you want to develop the trunk of either yourself or your runners, because that's really where a lot of the posture is going to be coming from, really especially in those hips. Okay, so any exercise is meant to strengthen the trunk. Okay, there's nothing groundbreaking there. And as I just said, back, hips, abdominals. Not really chest that we're dealing with here, because where people's mechanics break down is where they kind of hunch over. We want the back and the hips and everything to be kind of on point so that they're a little bit more upright in their posture. It's meant to improve posture and form while running. As I already said, traditionally viewed only with abdominals. This is where the issue kind of comes in. The problem is, and just think about the most obvious core strength work that you usually do. You see crunches, sit-ups, crossover legs, those types of things, V-ups, different things like that. The problem is a lot of these traditional core exercises put your body into a very hunched over position. If you think about when a kid looks like their mechanics are breaking down in a run and they're hunched over, well, that's basically the position you're in when you're doing a crunch or a regular sit-up or a lot of these other traditional core workouts. So if we do a ton of these, I mean, you can do some of them, but if you do a ton of those, you're just practicing this bad posture. So that's really where the issue, that can really harm correct running form. So we want to kind of get outside the box from these sort of hunched over abdominal crunching type of abdominal crunches and the like types of exercises. You need strong abdominals. Abdominals have to do with posture and also breathing. So we definitely want to make sure that they're trained, but how can we train them maybe in a way that's more sport specific to proper mechanics? So when picking strength exercises, think proper form. Get side just thinking just variation on crunches. Make sure you include lots of exercises for the hips also. Very, very important. This is an area that can really break down in distance runners, and make sure you include the back. Where would you sequence this in? This really pairs great with almost any types of running, and you can do it before or you can do it after. For me, I usually do it, I get best buy-in comes when we do it after recovery runs, or I actually should have put long runs on there. Basically anything at easy intensity, aerobic threshold, okay? Any of those types of workouts. Recovery runs, which usually have about 2 to 3 per week. Long run, which will have 1 per week. So you're going to do this about, probably about 3 times per week, different ways that you're going to be doing it. So you could do it beforehand if you wanted to. I just find it doesn't hurt you to do it beforehand. I just find I get best buy-in if you do it after the actual run, especially on recovery runs. I mean, you could do this on tempo runs. You could do this on higher intensity days, but those days are really kind of grueling. I like to do it on this days, just your easier types of days. You're going to get more buy-in from either yourself or your kids if you're doing it on those days, I find. As I just mentioned, done 2 to 3 times per week throughout the entire macro cycle. You can do this right up and through your championship season, and you can do it the very first workouts of your macro cycle. You can do this 2 to 3 times per week all year long. You can do this when you're actually on your transitionary period. That's not going to hurt you either, your time in between your seasons. So these are easy. This is why it's tier 1. Everybody can do this. You can do it multiple times a week. You can do it the entire year round. Tier 1, your basics, your trunk. How can we get the posture to be on point? Now, if you would like some examples, things that I've done, if you do want to do workouts, these are all ones that really kind of think about the posture. And I'll throw crunches and different variations in it when I think that it's appropriate. But the ones that really I think are good in terms of trying to keep more of a straight upper body, trying to keep those posture a little bit more on point. I'm going to start with hips. Again, I think hips are critically important. This is where you have a lot of injuries with the hip flexor, the IT band, all of these things that typically break down with distance runners. How can we strengthen that? So the hip routine that we'll do is called 4-way hips, and all of the exercises on here, if you do a search on YouTube, every single one of them, if you type in 4-way hips and you go into YouTube, the very first video that comes up, it's also, in every single case, it was the most viewed one, and the first one that pops up that was not an advertised one, showed proper way of doing this. So if you really want to kind of see what these look like in practice, a couple of them are even done by chiropractors or doctors talking about like recovery from surgery and things like that. I would take a look at those. I'm not going to show every single one of them in here, but take a look at them if you want to have an idea. But 4-way hips, you're going to do times 10 of them per set, 2 to 3 sets each way. Essentially, you're going to be moving your legs each direction, forward. You're going to be on your back while you're doing this. You're going to be going, forward, each side, inside, outside your leg, and then the back side. You're going to do 2 to 3 sets of them each way. Clamshells, I think this is a pretty commonly known one. It's where you're kind of on your side. Your hip bones are stacked up, and you're basically opening up your knees and your legs so it almost looks like a clamshell. You're going to do 25 to 35 of those for each leg. That is great for the IT band and strengthening that outside of your hip. 4-way hips do everything, essentially. Your hip flexor, your IT band, those abductor muscles, and your hamstrings up on the back side to kind of get everything targeted with your hips. So I would definitely do those on a very regular basis. Hip strength absolutely, positively should also include hurdle mobility drills, and everybody has these. You'll do them when you're at your track and you have access to your hurdles. But I think that this really kind of deserves its own video that I will do in the future. Right now we can't do anything on our school campuses or with our kids in Tampa, Florida, because of the coronavirus situation. So I can't go out and get a video of this, but I absolutely will do one. It deserves its own video later on. I would say with your hurdle mobilities, I would have a goal of doing them 1 to 2 times per week when you're at the track. Obviously, during your cross-country season, you're not going to be doing a lot of workouts on the track. So as long as you can try to get at least one done, I think this is a really important thing for hip mobility. Especially distance runners tend to be really tight in those hips. They do so much of the repetitive just, moving your hip forward and that hip flexor bringing your leg up and down, that you want to kind of get them as mobile as you can. And you can also mix this up by doing them before or after. There's, I think it's commonly done more before, but there's it makes some sense to do it afterwards too when they're a little bit more fatigued, like they might be at the end of the race, to make sure that they're mobile throughout the entirety when they're either fatigued or when they're fresh. All right, so basically there's going to be different variations on the Superman drills. If you do, like I said, a search on YouTube, there's different variations on that where you lift, Superman's where you're lying on your stomach and you're basically lifting up your arms and your legs. There's variations where you can do opposite arm, opposite leg, holding for about 1 to 2 solid seconds for each one. You can do both arms and legs at the same time, just arms, just legs, and you're going to do about 10 to 15. I try and mix it up with this, but I find this one exercise, variations on the Superman, gets everything you need with your back to help keep that upright posture when you need it. And now we'll go to abdominals at the end. Again, I want to kind of de-emphasize this, and you want to think good upper body posture when you are doing this, okay? So different variation on leg raises. When you're doing leg raises, typically your back is flat on the ground, so you're not getting hunched over, and you're lifting your legs up. And there's different ways you can do that. You got things like flutter kicks, just leg raises, holding them up and kind of holding them for time. Leg raises, I would say 10 to 25. You can mix up the different variations on time. But when your back is flat on the ground like that and you're just lifting your legs, you're keeping that more, you're not upright because you're on the ground, but you're not hunching over. And make sure they're not doing those hunch overs. The one that I don't like to do is V-ups, because V-ups basically your legs are up and then you're lifting your hands up to it. That gets you in that crunched over position too. That can lead to some bad posture. Rows or boat holds. Boat hold is basically where you're sitting on your butt and you're kind of just like holding that position. Your body is in an upright position, and you're almost kind of in almost like a sitting position, but you're just kind of sitting on your butt if you're holding it. And then rows, it's where you're up in that position, you go all the way kind of back down and then row back up. If you're doing rows, I would say 10 to 25 of them. They're a little bit challenging, and for boat hold, you can do it for time. Again, if you want to know what those look like, a simple a YouTube search, the very first one when I went through this, you'll find exactly what you're looking for with what they would look like. And different variations on planks with movement. I probably should have bolded and underlined with movement. Standard planks don't really do all that much. Just think about it. When you get into a plank position, you're usually feeling it in your arms more so than anything. Your core, really, unless you have a really, really, really weak core, it don't do very much. The world record for planking is 7-8 hours, something crazy like that. And if you can do that, it means you're not really doing a lot with your core. You want to have different variations on it. So if you think about it, if you do what are called plank leg raises, you can get into a normal plank position, a front plank position, but then you raise up your legs while you're doing it. That's going to teach some hip mobility too, and it's also going to mean that you're going to have more stable core to move your legs all the way through that range of motion. You can also do it with side planks where you're on your side and then you lift your legs up, you know, to get that that outside of your hip. It's kind of almost like when you look at the four-way hips, it's kind of almost like doing four-way hips but in a plank position, so there's more core strength that needs to be happening as you're moving it through the range of motion. Each of those variations on planks, I would do about 10 to 15 each. So you can see, my suggestion, this is a lot of emphasis on hips, back, and we do some stuff on the abdominals. A lot of times your abdominals are getting a lot of work in just breathing on your run, so you don't have to go crazy with it, but if you are going to do some things, and like I said, I throw some other ones that are more traditional at various times, but you just really want to think good upright posture when you're dealing with your trunk strength work. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to tier 2 that your somewhat experienced runners can do. This is different variations on plyometrics work or jump type of work. Typically, you would associate this with being really high intensity, but kind of what I suggest that you do with your distance kids is not going to be your crazy hurdle hops or jumping off boxes for depth jumps, the things that you would see a sprinter or a jumper do. If that's what we were doing, I wouldn't even have my super experienced kids do that. That's just, you know, kind of out of the realm of the normal things that a distance kid would do, but there are some things that we can do with a distance, mid-distance, endurance type athlete that I think really make it appropriate for tier 2, and I think it mixes in really well with some of the strength runs, alactic and short hill runs that we've talked about in some previous videos, as I mentioned in the description down below. So, why would you do this? Because it creates plyometrics creates an elastic response in the stretch shortening cycle. Okay, stretch shortening cycle. Your muscles, if they have a pre-stretch, they can produce more energy by kind of transferring the energy throughout different muscle groups. Creates that elastic response. This rapid transition from eccentric to concentric. So basically, when the muscle is stretched to shortened, hence the stretch shortening cycle. Eccentric is stretch. Concentric is when it's contracted or shortened. Muscle contractions. That's what you're doing with plyometric work. You're rapidly transitioning through this to build that elastic response. So it creates muscles that are stiffer upon impact. That's one thing that they do. And so it also allows you to, because of that stiff leg upon impact and this transfer and this elastic response, it transfers free elastic energy into the next step. So you've ever seen, like, you might have a sprinter, and in fact, our sprint coach at our school, Coach Tate, the kids even say it almost looks like he's not even running when he's running. It looks like he's almost like hopping or bounding because he's just got this very strong elastic response. And Coach Tate was a fantastic, and still really is, sprinter and hurdler, very, very high level hurdler, college runner, and you know, was part of the development team for USA. The USA team, it's really, you know, he's got a really developed elastic energy response, and that's what we want to really have, is how can we get it to where each step springs into the next one. This transfer of free elastic energy is what we're trying to get here. Okay, when this is developed, when it's well developed, you can transfer 10 to 30% of free energy into a race. That is crazy. So if you've got somebody who has a good elastic response, two people are running, you know, one has a good elastic response and one doesn't. The one with the good elastic response is getting 10 to 30% of their energy with each step from their legs for free because they are springing from one step to the next. So that really should tell you right there, oh wow, 10 to 30% free energy right there. They're going to be less fatigued at the end of the race. Sign me up. That's how we're going to do it, and that's why we're doing with these plyometric strength type drills. Short in-place plyometric exercises pair great when done before short speed or alactic work. And let me stop right here. We talked about how all running is strength work. All strength runs, alactic and short hill runs, and even medium and long hill runs, those are plyometric work in and of themselves, okay? So these things are things that we're adding to those workouts that are already plyometric in nature, and that's why they're going to pair with them. So short in-place plyometric exercises pair great when done. You want to do this before alactic workouts because after they're going to be fatigued from the actual alactic work. But if you do this beforehand, because it's shorter and it's just these in-place jumps, and once they get used to it, it's not nearly as tiring, you can get both of these done if you do this before. Basically, in a video I did on warm-ups in the description down below, I emphasized this being a part of basically your warm-up on your alactic days. All right, you can also do long bounding type plyometrics. This is more advanced. Pairs great when done before hill workouts, okay? Short hill, medium hill, long hill, this is where you would do this. This is a little more advanced. In my video on general preparation phase, and I'll put all those videos in the description down below, I talk about how adding short in-place plyometrics the first time you do your alactic workout, week 1 of your general preparation phase. I would definitely do that. Bounding circuit, I would do that in your second cycle of short hill interval. So I recommend, and this comes from various studies, doing about 4 to 5 weeks of short hill intervals, going away from it for 2 weeks, and then coming back to it for a second block in general prep. That second block is where I would add in this bounding, so they get a little bit used to it after not doing these type of plyometric workouts for a while, and then they advance to the long bounding, which is a little bit more advanced part of tier 2. Again, it pairs great when done before your hill workouts. You may need a few weeks or longer of general prep to get to this step, as we talked about. They can definitely get here by their first macro cycle. Some of them will be able to do it kind of from the get-go. But some of those kids, those ones that they don't have that response. Your kids that are slower on your fly 30 days, you might want to have them not do this, do a longer warm-up, get a good stretch in before the alactic workout. You might want to sit them out because they could potentially injure themselves in this if they don't have a good stretch shortening cycle response. Okay, so newer runners struggle with this because of the lack of ground preparation mechanics. That has to do with the stiffer leg upon impact. The more you do it, the more elastic your legs, your body basically prepares for ground contact by stiffening the leg, and newer runners don't have that response. After general running for a while, okay, so you go out and they're doing their recovery runs, their long runs, their tempo runs, all the different things they're doing during general prep on their first year. Their body gets used to the fact that they're going to be contacting the ground, and they can make more use of this and alactic work after they've just gotten more used to just running, essentially. You should do this about 1 to 2 times per week. Basically, pairing it up with this, you're going to have some weeks when you have alactic runs and short hill intervals during your general preparation phase. As you get later in the season, you're probably only going to have 1, and there are some times in general prep when you're also only going to have 1. So that's why I say 1 to 2. That's more than enough for, not more than enough, this is enough for a distance runner. This is what you want to, as long as you can kind of get 1 to 2, that's great. And you want to do this during general prep, so from the get-go, and you want to stop it during pre-comp. I haven't done videos on what that looks like, but basically you're not doing this during your championship phase for a number of reasons. All right, so what are some examples of plyometrics or jump-based work that you can do to add strength to your strength training plan? So the first one we'll talk about is short in-place jump circuit. As I mentioned, all of these, if you do a YouTube search, the first one that'll pop up, and it's also been the most viewed on all of these, we'll show you exactly how to do each of them, but I also have a video that I did just on our in-place jump circuits in the description down below. You may find some other ones you wanted to do also, perfectly fine. You want to do about 4 to 6 of them. We have 4 with the cross-field stride also. Done for 30 seconds each exercise, except the stride is just when you get there, you're done, with 15 seconds rest in between each. So you're going to do this for 30 seconds, go to 15 seconds rest, and jump into the next one. Typically, the first 1 or 2 for the year, we'll just do 1 circuit, and then we'll come through and we'll do 2 after that. And I'll have them just go get a drink of water or whatever in between. So probably about 3 to 5 minutes in between each section of it. So on all of these, you want to really kind of emphasize trying to come down with a stiff leg. You don't want them to just totally bend their knees and give away all the momentum. We're kind of trying to teach that stiff leg upon impact with this. And I actually talk about that in the video in the description down below if you want to see that in actual practice. In-place hops, side-to-side hops, basically it's jumping jacks without arm action. They can do the arm action if they want. Crossover hops. I do find that when they start doing the arm action, sometimes they start bending their knees a whole lot more, so that's why I wanted to just sort of focus on the hopping part. Crossover hops are the same thing as side to side, except they're going to cross over their legs each time they come back inward. And then bunny hops is basically just in-place hops, but they're going to be getting forward action, so they're going to be getting more force with each push-off, okay? Basically, we do this on our football field. We get about 50, 60 meters across in 30 seconds on the bunny hops, and then they're going to turn around and just do a cross-field stride just to kind of get the legs shaken back out. If we're doing another one, they go get water, and they come back and they do it again. I highly recommend doing this on grass without shoes. The reason being is you're going to be really forcing those muscles that are key with pushing off or toeing off, those muscles around, especially your big toe. It's going to strengthen those muscles. If you think about it, if you're running in your shoe when you're doing these types of things, even just the stride, your foot isn't doing nearly as much. It's kind of constricted. You do this without shoes for this little bit, and just think about how much more you have to push off with your toe to get that strength that you're really wanting to execute this properly. So I have a slide later on that talks about barefoot runs, but this is one type of drill that you would probably, and I would recommend doing it. Again, if you have a good place, we do this on our football field because we know there's nothing really in the middle that they're going to step on. Okay, long bounding circuit. Here's an example. If you look up all of these, I mean, these ones are pretty self-explanatory with this, but if you look up any of these on YouTube, I do not unfortunately have a video on these. I definitely need to when we get to able to get back to working with our group, hopefully mid-June. I'll definitely do one, and I can link it when we get to that. But if you look these up, these are not that, you know, they pretty much are what they sound like. And if you have a question, ask them in the description down below. I can go over it a little bit more. Each of these exercises is done for about 20 to 30 meters with about a 20-meter run out, and then you're going to walk back recovery. So it's about 50 meters, and you're going to walk back 50 meters, okay? 20 to 30 meters with a 20-meter run out at the end of each of these. The walk back is just if they were to develop any acid or whatever, it's going to clear by the time of the next one, kind of like walk back recovery on strides on some of the other workout videos we've talked about. Walking lunge, you know what this is. You're just walking and you're getting into a lunge position. You're not overstriding or understriding. I would only do this for about 10 to 15 meters. If you try and do this for 30 meters, they're actually really going to be, it really taxes you out to that. So I only go about 10 to 15 meters with a run out. Walk back, 5 good A skips. You're trying to emphasize as much horizontal distance. So you're basically telling them, get as much horizontal action, but make sure it's still a good A skip. In the description down below, the video on warm-ups, I kind of show what a good A skip is, not just your normal la-di-da, just going through the motions that a lot of distance kids will do. Walk back after your 20-meter run out. Then you're going to get A skips, and you really want to tell them, get up in the air. Vertical height on this one. Really get up in the air with each of those, not so much the horizontal distance, and then do your run out, walk back. And then opposite leg bounding. This is really what people call bounding. You'll have your jumpers, you'll have your sprinters, your more explosive type athletes. They'll do single leg bounds or kind of like a triple jump kind of drill. I would not do that with a distance kid. I would just do the every other leg, opposite leg bounding. Again, if you do a YouTube search, you will definitely find examples of that, but make sure you're doing, I would again say the opposite leg bounding is most appropriate for a distance or middle distance endurance type athlete. And then just end with a real good cross-field stride. All right, so the third tier of this is resistance training or weight training, med ball training, that kind of thing. This is what people traditionally think of when they think of strength work. But I think it definitely it can accent or add to what you're doing in terms of strength training or just overall training with your endurance kids. But I think it does need a very specific approach because of how specific the strength needs are for the cross-country 5K. So the reason why you would do this is to continue that force production development, but it really does need to be with the demands of the sport in mind, like all of this really is. In anything that we really want to do in training our kids with the demands of the sport in mind and that force production development in this case. So I would really target kids in this tier 3. I would only start doing with them if they show that they're on the upper end of your strength runs, your alactic runs and your short hill intervals. If they struggle on those days, they're not really ready for this increased force production. So it's not for those who struggle on those strength runs. If you really wanted to try and do something like this with them, you could maybe do it with just body weight. But if they can't really have high force production on these days with just their body weight with running, they're not really ready to add any artificial loading, which is what resistance weight training really is. With sport demand in mind, whatever you decide to do in terms of resistance weights, they should be single legs or sort of with the kinetic chain sort of in mind as you're kind of going through it. Because when you're running, how often do you have both feet on the ground? When you're actually running, the answer is never, not for a second. I mean, yes, when you're in a starting position, but I mean, when you're actually running, absolutely not. You're never going to have 2 feet on the ground. You're never asking your body to apply force with 2 feet at the same time. So why would we train it to have this in terms of resistance training with both feet on the ground at the same time? Or not both feet on the ground, but with it not being in the way that it would be while you were running. So you really want to kind of think of how can I make it this sort of natural running motion. You might have both feet on the ground, but really the emphasis is on single leg or kind of this kinetic chain idea as you're going through it. So there's some variations on how you do this, maybe with more of your traditional things, but things like double leg squats, double leg extensions or things like that, double leg calf raises. They really can't translate specifically because they're not specific to the race itself. So in order to have best strength transfer, we want to try and make it single-legged, or at least more in the way that you would be applying force while running. We want to kind of enhance or train it in that specific way. So I would definitely focus on higher weight, fast lifts with low number of reps and big rest. Essentially, it's going to mirror your alactic runs, those workouts. And there's a description, there's a video in the description down below about this. But basically, this is super short, super fast. Things like 30 meters and then 3 to 4 minutes in between. Fast with long breaks. It's going to mirror that basic idea. And the reason behind that is we want to really train the central nervous system to act quickly in creating force. Okay, this is the kind of strength we want. Early on in the video, we talked about how there's different ways where you can add strength. Hypertrophy is one of them, the adding of muscle, but that's really what we want to kind of limit when we're adding strength to a distance runner. We talked about muscle elasticity, where we can get free energy from training the muscles a certain way to be more elastic. And this is the other way, getting the central nervous system to be used to just firing very quickly when we need it to. And that's a different kind of strength that we can really deal with. The hypertrophy that we're going to get, as we saw before, can really come from just all of your running. So we want to try and limit that, and the type of lift that have high weight, fast lifts with low number of reps and big rest in between, that specifically is going to train more the central nervous system to fire and limit the amount of hypertrophy that's going to be happening. You want to stay away from time under tension, okay? Lifting medium weights many times, like 60 to 70% of your 1 rep maximum, a lot of times, 15, 20 times, that might sound like what a distance runner should be doing, so it kind of mirrors what you would be doing in training, but really this only leads to added time under tension, and added time under tension, basically sitting there having to hold the weight for a long period of time. That is what specifically creates hypertrophy. If you really want to get bigger with muscles tone, lift 60 to 70% of your maximum a lot of times with a little bit of rest. That constant tension in your muscles is what specifically targets hypertrophy. And as we saw from the ideal phenotype from our 2 world record holders in the 5K, they don't have a lot of muscle. They just, again, they look like somebody that would just be kind of walking down the street. They look very fit, but not super muscle bound. And lifting medium type weight a lot of times with a little bit of rest, that is just the prime way to add muscle mass and hypertrophy, which is not the kind of strength that we want with distance runners, okay? Hypertrophy, it's the building of protein from being under tension. It adds that unwanted weight that we don't want, okay? We already talked about that. This pairs great with any kind of strength run, okay? So alactic runs and any type of hill runs, you can throw resistance training in there. So typically you're going to do this about 2 times a week, okay? The timing of it, you can do it afterwards. So like if we're doing an alactic run or something, I might say to the kids, all right, you can lift in about an hour or so. Typically with lifting or medicine ball work, I let them do that on their own. Fortunately, we're in a situation where basically all the kids either have a gym membership or they can access it free from like a clubhouse in their neighborhood. So I don't want them to stick around later. So it actually kind of works out perfectly where I let them go and they can do it afterwards, or way before, like if they've got access to it, they can lift before they come to school. And then 6 or 8 hours later, or whatever it is, we do the workout after school. That works out perfectly too, and these things are very compatible. Now, you can also do them on aerobic threshold days too when you need to. And typically, in the summertime, you might have alactic and hills in the same week, but you're not going to really get this very often once the school year starts and you start adding different workout types. So you may not need to do it during your general prep because you get a decent amount of these, but in general prep, in order to get about 2 of these per week, you might have to pick a recovery run and throw it in there. There's nothing wrong with that. There's not a lot of stress that's happening on aerobic threshold, easy-paced days, so you can also do that too. But absolutely, I would highly recommend not ever doing resistance weight-type training on days when you've had them do a tempo workout, a VO2 max workout, or an anaerobic glycolytic workout for a couple of reasons. One, these are very, very demanding. Each take a lot of fuel sources, and you're just not going to have a lot of strength left over because these are very taxing workouts. Also, VO2 max and anaerobic glycolytic do create a lot of acid, which does prevent the central nervous system from firing really quickly. That's one of the things that it kind of does. The body doesn't necessarily like the acid. That's why you get that jelly-like feeling and everything. So if we're really trying to train the central nervous system to fire quickly, if we've done something like this on this day, they're just not going to get it. They're not going to get injured from doing it. They're just not going to get anything out of it. So it's kind of a waste of time. And you're already asking typically a lot of a distance runner in terms of just time. So again, it's not going to hurt them, but if you start doing this over, a bunch of weeks where you're just throwing it in there whenever, just whenever, they're not going to get the strength gains that you're really looking for in these days anyway, so it can hurt them in the long term in that respect. So yeah, I would just, don't just throw it in there because, I have a tempo run today, but I have to get another lift. These are the last things when I'm planning out my microcycles or my weeks or my macrocycles. I go and I put the workouts that take 48 hours to recover from in first, typically. Well, races first if you're in that point of the year, but 48-hour recoveries like your VO2 max or these workouts that we're talking about down here take 48 hours to recover from. Then I go and put the 24-hour recoveries, your aerobic threshold, your alactic, your hills, those kind of thing. And then after everything else is on paper, I go through and I start putting the strength training stuff in there, the core trunk type days, resistance days, the plyometrics days. Those are the last things that go in, and I get them in where I can, but I'm not going to force them in when it's just not going to benefit them from these other days. So keep that in mind. You can do whatever you want to, but it's just, you're not going to really get what you want if you just insist upon doing them on one of these types of days. It says 1 to 2 here. Really, probably 2 to 3 is probably better. 2 is what I always target. I try to almost always get 2 in there. Every once in a while, you go through a week where you just can't because of things like this. There's so many of these, and you have races and that kind of thing. Maybe you have to travel somewhere, far in your state to get to a bigger meet or something. So sometimes it becomes 1. Typically in general prep, you can get 2. Sometimes you can even get 3, and it might make sense to do that, especially if you're really trying to make strength progress with kids that can benefit from it, and they're kind of lacking in that, and you're trying to make some push on that. So you certainly can do it. So I would say 1 is the minimum. 2 is ideal. 3 can actually help you catch up if you need to. So what are some examples of weight training that you can do? Some things that I've done in the past or I'm currently doing. We'll start with actually your actual weights in a weight room, and then we'll progress to a medicine ball routine that you could do. These are just examples. You could certainly have your own ideas on this. These are just things that I've done. So you can do a lifting circuit. You really want to kind of target that higher end of their ability, so 80 to 90% of their 1 rep max. You don't necessarily have to do it. You can kind of guesstimate it a little bit, but it needs to be a high. It needs to be a higher load to get your central nervous system to need to fire quickly. 4 to 6 reps. If they're able to do it more than 6 times, they're going to spend a lot of time under tension, and it's not going to be building what we want, and it's probably not really heavy enough to get that really fast central nervous system firing that we want. I'd say 2 to 3 sets of everything, and 5 minutes between supersets. Supersets basically means you're going to do exercise 1, move to 2, move to 3, move to 4, and then you're going to do 5 minutes in between. So it's not going to take nearly as long as it seems. So you're only going to get that 5-minute break either once or twice. I would really, the first couple times, recommend 2. 3 is really where you want to target, just like 2 times a week. 3 sets is kind of the way to go. You can use a barbell, or you can use a barbell with weights, just a barbell if you're still just getting used to it, or dumbbells, whatever kind of works for you and for your situation. If you search for any of these in YouTube, the very first video that pops up, the most viewed one for each of these, it goes through it exactly perfectly. But if you have any questions on them, please ask them in the comments down below. Split leg squat, it basically sort of looks like a lunge, to where you're really targeting that front leg, getting that single leg we're dealing with here. But it kind of gets your leg in that trail position as if you're kind of getting into, takeoff, and then you're kind of bring it back around again to the next step. So you're going to do 4 to 6 reps with both legs, right leg front and then left leg front, however you want to do it. Single leg calf raises, same thing. Most people probably know what calf raises look like. Don't do it single leg. You want to do it, do it single leg. You don't want to do it double leg. Walking lunges, again, the closest thing to kind of mirroring what you could do with this with weights. You wouldn't really want to run with weights. I would not recommend that, especially with high school kids. But that's going to kind of take you through the whole range of motion as if you were running. And then leg extensions, single leg. Leg extensions are really important to fighting off things like runner's knee, so I would definitely recommend having that in your regimen. You could add more to it. I like to keep it very simple, especially because these are days that typically are on really workouts that take a long time, like alactic or hills. So I basically, this should take 15, 20 minutes maybe, if they're kind of doing it right and going through it, between 15 and 20 minutes, so it's not asking too much of them. Exercises that target your arms, they're really not that relevant. You're not going to get hypertrophy if you do them the same way. Like if you wanted to do a bench press or something like that and you did high weight very quickly, you're not going to get a lot of hypertrophy. You're going to get a lot of, you know, more explosiveness in your arms and your chest, but it really isn't relevant to cross country. You can certainly do it. These are the 4 that I give my crew. I'm sure that the boys, especially in the group, are going to be, you know, doing some things with their arm just because it's something that boys gravitate to. But as long as they're keeping things in mind and they're not trying to get bigger, that hypertrophy isn't happening, it's not that big of a deal. But it's also, if you do get bigger muscles, it is going to consume the oxygen that we want going to the working muscles, not in your arms, but we want it going to your legs. And it could add weight if it's done incorrectly, if it does add hypertrophy. These are things we do not want. Now, med balls are things that I've done in the past. I would like to do them again, but I also don't want to tell my crew to go out and just buy, you know, med balls. So I've kind of put these on the back burner, but they're really good because they really get the whole kinetic chain. Because when you're doing things like throwing a med ball, you start with it starts at your feet and it kind of comes all the way through your body, and it kind of gets that whole kinetic chain, and your body's sort of able to synchronize move all together while applying force. So it really does work nicely if you can make it work for your situation. I would definitely, if you're going to do it, get soft medicine balls for a couple reasons. One, if you're using a hard medicine ball and some of these things like jump ball slams, that thing can go everywhere. So obviously you're not going to do it inside. You're going to break something. You can do it outside. But you can also, it can come up and pop you in the chin really easily. So the soft medicine balls really don't go anywhere very much, if at all, when you throw them at high force. So I would recommend getting a soft one if you can. Fast throws, just like fast lifts, it promotes transfer of energy trained similar to plyometric exercises. What I would do is each of them for 10 to 20 seconds with 15 to 30 seconds in between each. One set, and then go back through like a superset like we set up here. Maybe 2 to 3 sets, 3 to 5 minutes. I would give like 5 minutes, but a lot of times when you're doing something like this, give yourself at least 3 minutes. 5 would be better between those sets. Again, just like up here, if you search for these, the very first video on YouTube that'll pop up will be it. But these are pretty self-explanatory. Jump ball slams, you're going to grab the ball, you're going to jump up, and you're going to slam it down as hard as you can. Get that whole kinetic chain kind of going on there. And if you have a hard medicine ball with that one, be very careful, essentially. Try to get a soft one if you don't already have one. Chest wall passes, basically is where you're just kind of throwing it up against a wall and it's popping back to you. You can do this with somebody else, but especially if you have a hard one, be careful with it. I've seen this variations where you can kind of be doing side steps as you're kind of going down a wall. That can get some extra kinetic chain action happening here, but I would maybe start with just kind of stationary wall passing. Rotating wall slams, basically you're going to stand with, say, your left side facing the wall, and you're going to turn and you're going to slam the medicine ball on the wall. I would recommend kind of then flipping and then grabbing it as it comes through, and then do it with the right side, and then switch to the left side, left side, so you get a little routine going. That's a little more advanced. You could just do all left side and then all right side, or maybe do it for 10 seconds left side, 10 seconds right side. It's kind of overdoing it a little bit on one side. You'll find it very, very tiring if you don't do the flipping and rotating each side with each throw. And again, each side with each throw, get the legs a little bit more involved. And overhead ball throws, you're just going to launch the ball up in the air, basically as high as you can. That's really getting all the way down and exploding up through your legs and getting that kinetic chain action really happening. So either are considered resistance training, whatever works best for you and your situation, go for it. With those kids that would really benefit, those ones that really show really good force production already on those strength workouts. Okay, so leg strength is really, really important. Those are the muscles that are working, and posture is really, really important also to maintain good mechanics and form. But the other place where you really do need a lot of strength with especially the 5K is foot strength, that push-off. And we touched about this a little bit briefly early on with the plyometrics, and I want to bring it up a little bit here just to kind of recap it and see where you could even add more of this later on in your training year. If done right, barefoot running can improve foot strength. Absolutely has been shown over and over again. It can also help in terms of forefoot striking versus rear foot striking, but it also increases the strength of the foot. This improved push-off strength allows for more power and improved economy. So the idea being is, more force production at race pace. Those are one of the important things that we talked about earlier on with strength adaptations that we want. This can help do this with increasing the strength of the foot. There are two main ways you can do it, okay? Option number one is to never wear shoes at any point during the day, which is not really practical if you are watching from the United States. In a lot of Western countries, there's just not, it's not really acceptable to just go around barefoot all day. So it's really just not practical for a lot of people. The other option is to run barefoot during certain high-intensity workouts, okay? The plyometrics, the short in-place ones that we talked about. You could also do them with the bounding circuit. I just find that I can't do it with the bounding circuit because we're always doing them on hill days, and I'm not going to have my kids do that like at a park where there's just like stones and rocks and everything everywhere. None of the places that we have hills, at least, would it be safe for. But the short plyometric drills, the in-place jumps, that's when I've done it throughout the entire macro cycle. That helps with the push-off. And then later on in the year, special endurance 2 workouts. I have some videos, I'll grab a few and put them in the description down below, where we go to a specific park and big open field where it's just a great big circle and it's about 400 meters, perfect distance for special endurance 2. And that pushing off of the ground really does force you to really toe off a little bit more. If you think about it, when your foot's kind of like in a shoe, it's not really doing all that much. You're kind of doing a lot of work with your ankles, but your foot's kind of like set in place. As soon as you take your shoe off and you start pushing off, especially against grass, you really get those muscles of the foot kind of really engaged a whole lot more. And special endurance 2 is a fast workout. It is high intensity. We'll go over this when we start getting into the second half of the microcycle workouts. These are fast. These are very fast. And that increased intensity helps train get the strength of the foot that we're not going to be getting because we are going to be wearing shoes through most of the day in practical sense. So this is what you can be doing right now, the plyometric drills, those in-place short jumps during general prep. Later on, specific prep, especially pre-comp, this is where you can add to it. You're still going to be doing the plyometrics through the beginning of pre-comp, but you're also going to be doing this when specific prep starts to happen the second half of your macro cycle. So I just wanted to point on this because foot strength is really important. Running barefoot just to do it doesn't help. If you're going to do the plyometrics in-place jumps and do it like 2 times a year without shoes, don't just leave your shoes on the whole time. You have to do it often to kind of train this. So just running barefoot or doing any of these things barefoot just to do it doesn't help. Also, things like warm-ups and short cool-downs. I've seen a lot of people kind of talk about, hey, do your mile warm-up on the field and do it without your shoes, or do a half-mile cool-down or something like that, half-mile cool-down. If you've seen this channel, you know that I usually go no less than 20 minutes on a cool-down. But just doing that little amount at aerobic threshold, you need the higher intensity if you're going to only do workouts barefoot or, without your shoes for the short period of time. So just doing this, it's not intense enough, it's not enough, right? So doing it on the infield of the track, it might make you feel better about it, saying, oh yeah, we're doing some barefoot runs, but it's just not long enough or fast enough to make any real strength gain. So if you're going to do it, these are the 2 ways to do it, but do it consistently, okay? Incorporating some additional barefoot strides during the plyometrics, like you saw, I've got some strides and things like that. That may help, but you really, this is the way to do it. This is what the research has shown kind of does it. Maybe, again, you want to add a few more strides or something like that, maybe as part of your warm-up when you're doing your plyometrics. Great, fantastic. You want to do maybe some strides as part of the beginning of your cool-down for special endurance 2. I don't like doing it on those days, but you could. That may help, but it's not going to be big enough to make any real difference, essentially. These are the 2 main ways you can do it. Never wear shoes. Again, not really practical for a lot of people. And then run barefoot, do these drills either with some of the plyometrics work where it's safe, and special endurance 2 when you get to that part of the season. And so I'll do a whole later video just on barefoot special endurance 2. I have some from the previous years, but I didn't really talk about it a whole lot, but you'll kind of see it happening. But we'll do a whole workout series on that when we get to that part of the season. Okay, key points. I threw everything up on the screen here. These are the things we've already talked about. All running is strength work, no matter the intensity, okay? We just want to add to that in the smartest way possible, okay? Whenever you're pushing off the ground, resisting gravity, and then landing multiple times your body weight, it's strength work. How do we add to that in a smart way? When creating additional strength training, consider the specific demands of the sport. You figure it out. If you think there's something that I'm missing that you think is important for the demands of the sport, go for it, okay? Just make sure you're considering the sport, Consider also the specific athlete's strength level. Where are they? And don't have them start doing something that they're not prepared for yet. Don't emphasize muscles just because they exist. You could have the biggest shoulder muscles in the world, but it's not going to make you better as a cross-country runner. The biggest chest muscles in the world, but it's not going to make you a better cross-country runner. Make sure that it makes sense. Consider the phenotype you're trying to develop. We talked about at the very beginning of this with the 2 world record holders and why they make such good 5K runners. Sequence your strength training where it complements the rest of what you're doing. Tier 1 can pair with anything before or after. Tier 2 pairs before specific strength runs, alactic and hill runs. And Tier 3 pairs after, or way before, like 6 to 8 hours, specific strength type runs. And you could also, as I said before, do it during your aerobic threshold days, but do not do it during those tempo, VO2 max, or anaerobic glycolytic days. Anything that produces acid or really fatigues the athlete, they're just not going to get anything out of Tier 3 if you just throw it in there. And foot strength is the key specific strength component, as we talked about before. So start developing that now during general prep with some barefoot plyometric drills in general prep. And then later on, you can start adding in some more things with special endurance too when you get to the specific prep part of the training year. So lots going on here. As I mentioned, any of these, I've got a short plyometrics drill video down in the description down below if you want to take a look at what we do. Everything else, I know that if you search for it, the very first video that'll pop up on YouTube will put you on the right track. I viewed every single one of them before I made this, so it's definitely spot on. But if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments down below. I've been getting some great comments and questions over the last few videos, and I'd like to continue that and love answering those or kind of chiming in with what you guys are seeing. So that would be fantastic if you guys have any questions or comments. If you do find these videos helpful, I do about 3 to 5 videos on running per week. So if you find these helpful, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It really does help the channel. It pops up in other people's feeds, and then other people can find it if they are looking for a similar type of topics, if you found it helpful, and maybe share it around if you also found it helpful. I'm going to be looking at some videos in terms of sequencing everything in general prep, you know, how you can kind of go through. I made a fictitious general preparation plan, but how you could sequence them, kind of looking through what workouts take more time, so that if you obviously probably are not going to be able to follow that the whole way through. So sequencing some workouts, kind of do some summaries on some different aerobic paces, and then we'll start looking at some specific prep planning and workouts as you get to that part of the year, probably more like August timeframe if you're starting your general prep here in June. So until next time, this has been Coachy TV.